Still to come, our press preview. All of the morning papers coming up for you with broadcaster and classical music presenter Petrok Trelawney and the journalist and writer Nabila Ramdani. Welcome to you. Thanks for being with us tonight. And if you survive Black Friday, well, let's just tell you that if we get the right page up, the Metro is warning that Cyber Monday's 650 million madness is on its way. Yes, the spending's not over yet, I'm afraid. You're watching Sky News. All the front pages coming up in our press preview shortly. First, let's update you with our top stories tonight. And the Chancellor has, or will give the NHS more than £3 billion as part of the autumn statement to be announced on Wednesday. £1.1 billion for GP services coming from fines on bankers. Chairman of the Commons Culture, Media and Sport Committee has called FIFA's World Cup bidding process deeply corrupt and completely flawed after fresh allegations in a document compiled by the England delegation. And police in New York are investigating a bomb threat made to an American Airlines flight from Barcelona. A plane carrying 200 people landed safely at JFK Airport in New York. But it is now that press preview with all those front pages, and joining us tonight for the headlines we have broadcaster and classical music presenter Petrok Trelawney.
Good evening.
And journalist and writer Nabila Ramdani.
Hello.
Thank you for being with us. Front pages as ever, The Guardian saying the Chancellor has come under fire after the revelation that a large chunk of the money he's promised to inject into the NHS will come from the Department of Health. The Telegraph reporting on announcements made by the Chancellor too, but this time his plans to spend billions on new roads, or upgrading roads across the UK actually. The Mail claiming the government has failed though to keep its promise. It's the FT. Which we can tell you is talking about the weak performance of investment management firm PIMCO. Figures showing the company's had to pay out $100 billion in redemptions this year. That's very interesting for you, I know. Victims of a pension mis-selling scandal are set to receive part of an £8.5 billion payout, says the Express, the wrong annuities given to people. The Metro says online shoppers expected to spend record-breaking amounts of money during tomorrow's Cyber Monday. Apparently that's the next date in the calendar after Black Friday. Goodness knows what Tuesday will bring. The Mirror goes with the Tory MP who voted for NHS privatisation, but has a second job with a firm that stands to get, yes, private NHS contracts. The Sun has the story of the whistleblower who exposed Andrew Mitchell's role in plebgate. He says he was arrested and humiliated by Met Police bosses who were trying to cover up the scandal, he claims. And the Star has the latest from the jungle. Again and again. And let's see what Petrok and Nabila have taken from that. You've gone for The Guardian. And Osborne under fire over $2 billion NHS pledge because 750 million is actually coming from the health department itself.
Yeah, go
Creative account. You're both stunned by this.
Yeah, I mean, I think Larry Elliott rather sums it up, the Guardian's economic...
All right, should we move that up? Because he's got a sort of think piece here.
He's got a think piece at the bottom of the page. As he says, Wednesday will be the political equivalent of the family rummaging down the back of the sofa for some loose change to feed the electricity meter. And that really does seem to sort of sum up the mood of where this money's come from.
It's quite a bit of loose change. It's $2 billion he's found knocking about.
Yeah.
That's extraordinary, isn't it?
And you think, well, that sort of certainly rids the government, I would have thought, of any kind of rainy day money. You know, that is going to be kind of bringing the cash reserves absolutely dry. I mean, the positive spin that they can put on this is that £750 million, has been saved, and then 1.1 billion comes from evil bankers.
Exactly.
Well, how's that for a good
Well,
PR
I mean, this is a point, because Labour had challenged George Osborne to actually use that money for the public good, hadn't they?
Yes, indeed, and it's no coincidence that the Conservatives are coming up with this kind of strategy just before the Labour Party is due to announce, its stance on the NHS, and it's effectively stealing their thunder. And on the surface, it's an extremely positive story. It looks very good for the Conservatives, and what we are effectively being told by George Osborne is that, they will. The Conservatives will, get money back from greedy bankers and transfer it to kind-hearted medics, which everybody supports, of course.
Yeah.
But I think this is what you call a sweetener, and
there is a bitter pill perhaps. I mean, you know, the think piece
Well,
at the bottom is indicating the fact is there is still no money.
Yeah.
I mean, Liam Burns' infamous quote, you know, the cupboard is bare. It's still bare.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, the proof is going to be in the mathematics, and George Osborne is bound to come under massive scrutiny right up until his statement, his autumn statement, you know, this week, but also in the few months to come. People would want to know exactly where this money is coming from.
And Labour are talking about weaponising the NHS, you know, really making that the big part of their campaign in the run-up to the election. Andy Burnham quoted on the front page of The Guardian, the Shadow Health Secretary, saying, yeah, hang on, this £750 million is coming from government departments, but actually it's coming from one department, the Department of Health. So it's actually sort of Peter robbing Paul, because the money is sort of already there. So as he says, this is just spin. Whether or not that's true, George Osborne will dispute, of course.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
there's going to be a lot of argument about where this money is coming from. Plus the fact the NHS is saying, well, hang on, we need 20 billion guaranteed to be in place between now and the end of the next parliament.
Well,
so
exactly.
2 billion
And this is
sweetener for now
precisely
isn't enough.
the point that Burnham is also making, is that this money will, if it is available, will only, you know, come into play until April, not before. And he's more concerned about, you know, A&E being under massive pressure.
There's going to be spending elsewhere. I mean,
always
there's a bit more sugar to help the medicine go down on the front of the FT, because it's talking about plans for road building, or road improvement, really, because we're talking about, well, real familiar bottlenecks, the A303 by Stonehenge.
Well, you and I both know from our lives in the south and southwest. I mean, that's been talked about for decades, putting a tunnel in to get around Stonehenge. The A47 into Norfolk, around Great Yarmouth and King's Lynn, which is still single carriageway in many places. The A1. I mean, shocking when you think of the size and the importance of Newcastle and Edinburgh as great British cities. But the road between the two of them is shocking. But you can see this going out, can't you, on a dozen press releases from Tory and Lib Dem MPs saying, look what's happening in my constituency. I mean, this really is giving out the baubles before the election.
And exactly, and isn't it the kind of typical stories you get before general elections, where you effectively have a government that's getting out of the way, you know, austerity and all undesirable policies, to come up with these very positive stories.
But there's an interesting caveat here, which the FT has just inserted. Rapid growth in low-wage work, fewer housing transactions, income tax revenues and stamp duties falling short of the March forecast, along with revenues from North Sea oil, because, of course, as the oil price drops, so does the tax take on it. So a lot of these figures may have been worked out on assuming that the receipts coming in were going to be a bit higher.
And this is the fundamental problem for George Osborne, isn't it? Yes, you know, some areas of his economic policy are working in terms of the general growth of the British economy, but what austerity has done is robbed other areas and at the same time led to a much lower tax return in terms of high rate VAT, in terms of income tax,
and I remember
indeed North Sea oil tax.
him insisting since in 2010 that he had no money because of New Labour policies. And so.
Well, we haven't taken to the streets yet, but they certainly have in Hong Kong. Staying with the FT, they've got that scene there of policemen confronting, as they say, pro-democracy protesters, because a group of MPs planning to visit Hong Kong have been banned by the Chinese government. Sir Richard Ottaway, chairman of the House of Commons Committee, asking for an emergency debate. Outraged, it seems.
I do think this is something really, you know, even more important than actually the FT represented as on their front page. I mean, this is an extraordinary thing that China is banning British legislators from going to Hong Kong, which, after all, we have a relationship with in the 50-year Sino-Anglo agreement, which is meant to run through until 2047. Also, we can all go, if we're a British citizen, we can go to Hong Kong. We get 180 days there visa-free. The rest of Europe only gets 90 days. I don't quite see on what terms they can ban legislators from going. It's really quite shocking.
But it's hardly surprising coming from China, since, you know, it essentially doesn't want British MPs to investigate its conduct in a former British colony. That's it. That's
and we've seen, I mean, I think we've still got this live picture coming in at the moment, because the financial district is due to get back to work shortly. I mean, nothing like the numbers we saw in October, but certainly a lot of students apparently and other protesters have amassed again to block the main route towards the financial district, because they are still very angry about this idea that you can vote, but only from a pre-selected list of candidates.
I think these pictures say everything about the ongoing state of turbulence in China, and of course the bad press that the Chinese are getting around the world.
Yeah.
I mean, Chinese police is using very tough methods to suppress that kind of dissent. Thousands of pro-democracy demonstrators have been on the streets for more than 2 months now. It has to be said that they are relatively well behaved.
Yeah, and they have been allowed to make their protest. That is another issue that a lot of people have been commenting
Although
on.
they weren't allowed to take, if you remember, their protest to Beijing, which
Yes.
the student leaders proposed to do.
Yeah.
I think this makes a very interesting point here. We often hear that Britain doesn't really matter in the great scheme of things for China, that we're pretty much an irrelevance. And yet China's anger when David Cameron met the Dalai Lama, for example, or now when British MPs propose to go and observe what's happening in terms of demonstration, China gets very worked up about it.
gets
So we
quite sore.
clearly do have more clout with China than sometimes we give ourselves credit for, which means I think we can perhaps rattle our own sabres a bit more loudly than we sometimes allow ourselves
Although
to
the
do.
Financial Times qualifies all that by saying that David Cameron has been quite muted in its criticism towards China, putting more emphasis on
Well, I think there's
deepening
great fear that we'll lose Chinese
trade,
investment in British
yes.
companies.
Yeah, well, that's what it's all about, isn't it?
But actually, clearly, China is worried about our political viewpoint as well, so we could be rather braver here.
Metro, with this extraordinary shot. This looks like that scene, you remember in Raiders of the Lost Ark? That's Amazon. So if you're waiting for your Christmas present, it's in there somewhere.
Peterborough, that's it.
Yeah. But Cyber Monday, 650 million madness after we saw the madness of Black Friday. But I guess it means we won't be scrambling over each other to collect the TV. This is actually just, pressing buttons on your computer at home.
Yeah, I suppose it's quite handy, although I have to say I'm not into online shopping. I like the physicality of going to a shop
Or
and
beating other shoppers to get to the... Only joking, yeah.
I mean, they break down the figures on the Express have got this inside. £358,100,000 per hour, at £6,000 a second. Of course, the worry is that the third-party servers that service Amazon and all these other companies may well crash. And then there's the second point, which, of course, we must be getting close to.
When's it going to be delivered?
Will it be delivered? Will the delivery companies be able to cope? I mean, I suppose this is marginally better than Black Friday, which I have to say I thought was one of the most depressing days of recent years in this country, seeing people fighting over saving 50 quid in a television that they probably don't need. It was very... And the idea that John Lewis, a group founded by a great Quaker, what does Black Friday have to do with Quaker principles?
Just before the Advent.
It's outrageous.
But the other issue is, if Labour are going to go on the cost of living crisis and no one has money to do anything, what does this tell us actually about households? They are spending like mad. Is that not the case?
Yes,
they're
but,
working out per household what they're spending on white goods and luxury
But it seems
goods.
that they're getting a lot of discounts by doing it online, which they probably won't get if they, were buying stuff from shops.
Right.
So I think that's an extra incentive because it's much cheaper, and actually it makes. There's a similar story in the Telegraph, which says it makes Boxing Day irrelevant.
Yeah, well, at
Boxing
least
Day
we won't
sales,
have that awful thing after you've bought your Christmas present and find it even cheaper after Christmas than New Year's sales. Anyway, coming up, the mystery loud bangs that have shaken Britain. What are they? We'll be investigating that in a moment. Welcome back to our press preview. All the front pages coming in with Petrock and Nabila. Never mind the autumn statement. The Daily Mail really knows what's at the heart of Middle England. Weekly bins, the great betrayal. Families wait average 12 days for a collection. Shock horror.
Beautifully read.
Mind you, local authorities had promised, so they were going to collect weekly.
Well, I think it was a coalition promise, wasn't it?
Was it?
Because there was a move led by local authorities saving money to say, let's go for fortnightly collections, which Labour, I think I'm right in saying, didn't get terrifically worried about. And the coalition put that even into the manifesto, saying that weekly bin collections will return. But apparently just 6% of councils are doing weekly collections.
So if it was put in the manifesto, it deserves a front page then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But the other aspect is that they've got an average now of 4 different bins they've got to cope with for different bits to be collected.
Yeah, I've just got 2 where I live. We've got a recycling bin and then a regular black bin collection, both of which are collected every week. I mean, the paper also makes this interesting point that there is a creeping trend for councils to charge fees for some collections. So whether it's collecting old white goods, to the ones that you've replaced on Black Monday or Black Friday or Cyber Monday, or whether it's garden waste that, you know, traditionally was collected for free. Now local councils are beginning to charge. But, you know, given the pressure that local councils are under and the reduced budgets they have, that's probably not entirely surprising.
Front of the Telegraph, you've spotted a story about Islamic State, or ISIL as it's called by the Americans. Secret British role in halting ISIL massacre. Let's take a look at that. That's quite interesting. If you just press that once, well, there it goes. A clandestine British squad. So one assumes this is special forces?
Well, yes, whether... I think it's been run actually by ex-military people.
Oh, I see.
It's to build a series, but with the approval of the government, indeed, I think with the approval of the British Embassy in Beirut, to build a series of watchtowers to protect a place called Ras Baalbek, which is a Christian settlement in Lebanon with a very important abbey in it and a couple of Byzantine churches that was under threat from ISIL. But quite how significant it is, I don't know.
So this is quoting a former soldier running the project. Tango 10, a watchtower built of former shipping containers.
At a budget price of £150,000.
It's an extraordinary story, isn't it? But no pictures to show as yet. So.
And it's all built around, of course, you know, the British government doing its bit to save Christian communities in particular. To me, it sounds like a desperately positive story when it comes to dealing with a very intractable problem, actually. And it has to be said that the first and foremost victims of ISIL are Muslims themselves. And so it's, you know, typical Western angle, I suppose, on a very on a story that involves, you know, more
huge
than
numbers,
just Christians, but you know.
I mean, the British ambassador says that what ISIL want are big symbolic victories, i.e. they get in and they take over a particular place, and I suppose you could just see this as being the same story the other way around. It's a symbolic achievement by Britain.
Sun, whistleblower cop tells of Met cover-up, exclusive, arrested, silent, sacked for exposing plebs MP. This is former PC Jim Glanville, who is feeling quite sore at his treatment by Metropolitan Police bosses.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of story was, in fact, inevitable following the libel case. I think clearly this is a vindication of the Sun's journalism as well. And they're, of course, perfectly entitled to now explain their position in forthright terms, as it were. They were not allowed to do so while legal proceedings were going on, for obvious reasons. And other parties, including the whistleblower, could have been encouraged to stay quiet during investigations as well. And so it's fascinating also to see that cases veer between accuser and accused, because at some stage Mr. Mitchell's story sounded quite credible, and it sounded like the police were actually in the wrong, and people are now allowed to speak out and speak without fear.
But is it another case of a whistleblower as well suffering as a result of actually, you know, putting his hand up and saying?
Well, that certainly seems to be the implication of what the newspaper's saying, and you know, illustrated with a picture of Andrew Mitchell at the heart of all of this as well, and licking his wounds this weekend as he
looking suitably reflective. I think is the phrase.
Contemplates what the future holds for him. I suppose the lesson with all of this, as David Mellor actually seems to have done quite effectively, is when something like this happens, apologise and move on, and hope that you can at least
stick to water,
undo some of the damage, and maybe stick to water.
Express, page 2. Britain shaken by loud bangs. Now, I certainly we've seen a lot of emails in the inbox coming in. Let's just move this down. It's at the top of the page there, and people are still mystified about what's causing it. But certainly, a lot of people have heard something going on.
Yeah, and these bangs were heard from Devon right up to Aberdeen. All sorts of theories about whether it was space debris entering the Earth's atmosphere. Apparently there is the debris of a ruined Russian satellite, the paper reports, called Cosmos 2251, which is scheduled for re-entry. Was it something more sinister? Was it military jets going on? One Twitter user the paper says named Mr. M, claimed the loud bangs were controlled explosions following a foiled terror plot with controlled media coverage to prevent mass panic.
I think that was why they closed the A1 in Catterick and then found nothing, wasn't it? So there we are. But
well, we need the RAF UFO unit back, don't we? That was disbanded, I think, 2009, was it? Or
yes, what were the files called? The
yeah.
something files?
Yes. Yeah.
I remember it well. Thank you for that. More, of course, coming up at 11:30.